The scholar's hands were shaking. Not from cold, the palace library was warm, almost stifling, but from something else. Something he could not yet name. The parchment was gazelle skin. Old. The edges were torn, roughly half of whatever it had once been. The ink had faded to a pale brown, but the lines were still visible. Coastlines, islands, ships drawn in the margins. The usual decorations of an old nautical chart. Halil Edhem Eldem turned the fragment toward the light. In the corner, an inscription in Ottoman Turkish. A date. He read it twice. Then a third time. The date was 1513. He looked at the coastline on the left side of the map. He recognized it immediately. Anyone would. It was South America. The eastern coast, from what is now Brazil down to the southern tip of the continent. The proportions were remarkably accurate. The rivers were in the right places. The mountains were indicated correctly. But then his eye traveled further south. Past the tip of South America. Past where the land should have ended. And there was more coastline. Continuing, curving. A massive landmass extending east beneath where South America ended. Eldem set the parchment down. His hands were still shaking. The coastline below South America, if it was what it appeared to be, depicted a continent that would not be officially discovered until 1820. More than 3 centuries after this map was made. And there was something else. Something worse. The coastline did not match Antarctica as anyone in 1929 knew it. It did not show the ice shelf. It showed what appeared to be the actual land beneath. Rock, mountains, bays and inlets. As if someone had drawn Antarctica before the ice was there. Or as if someone had known what lay beneath it. Halil Edhem Eldem stood alone in the Topkapi Palace Library on that October afternoon in 1929. He was looking at half of a map that should not exist. He did not know it yet, but he had just uncovered one of the most persistent mysteries in the history of cartography. One that has never been solved. If you're new here, this channel covers history's unsolved cases. The ones that were closed too soon, or never closed at all. The ones where the official explanation doesn't quite fit the evidence. I'm glad you're here. This one has been on my list for a long time. Let's get into it. To understand the map, you had to understand the man who made it. And Piri Reis was not some anonymous cartographer working in obscurity. He was one of the most important naval figures in Ottoman history. A man whose career spanned 4 decades of Mediterranean warfare. A man trusted by sultans. His real name was Ahmed Mahidin Piri. He was born around 1465 in Gallipoli, on the European shore of the Dardanelles. His uncle was Kemal Reis, a famous Ottoman privateer and later admiral who spent decades raiding Venetian and Spanish shipping across the Mediterranean. Piri went to sea with his uncle as a young man. He learned navigation. He learned warfare. He learned to read the sea the way a scholar reads a book. By his 20s, Piri Reis had participated in naval battles against the Spanish. He had sailed to North Africa. He had navigated waters from Egypt to the coast of France. He was not a theorist drawing maps from descriptions. He was a working sailor. He knew what coastlines looked like because he had seen them. But he was also a scholar. In an age when most sailors were illiterate, Piri Reis collected books. He gathered charts. He interviewed other sailors about distant waters. He was obsessed with accuracy. With getting things right. This mattered to him in a way that went beyond professional necessity. In 1513, while stationed in Gallipoli, he began work on a world map. We know this because he told us. In the margins of the map itself, in his own handwriting, Piri Reis explained exactly what he was doing. He listed his sources. He described his method. He was meticulous, almost defensive, as if he knew that someday, someone would question what he had drawn. The 1513 map was not his only work. In 1521, he completed the first edition of the Kitab-i-Bariyeh, the Book of Navigation. It was a comprehensive atlas of the Mediterranean, with detailed charts of every major port, instructions for navigation, information about harbors and anchorages. It remains one of the most important maritime documents of the 16th century. A second, expanded edition was presented to Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent in 1526. Piri Reis continued to rise. By the 1540s, he was an admiral. He commanded the Ottoman fleet in the Indian Ocean. He captured Aden. He besieged Hormuz. He was in his 80s and still fighting. The man who made the map was not a mystic or a dreamer. He was a practical naval officer with a reputation for precision. His story ended badly. In 1553, after a failed campaign in the Persian Gulf, Piri Reis was accused of cowardice and corruption. He was executed in Cairo. He was nearly 90 years old. His maps and books survived him. Most of them, anyway. The world map, the one that would cause so much trouble 4 centuries later, was torn in half at some point. When or why or by whom, no one knows. Only the western fragment survives. The eastern half, which would have shown Asia and perhaps more of Africa, has never been found. Some historians believe it was destroyed. Others think it might still exist somewhere, in a library, a private collection, a box of documents no one has opened in centuries. This matters, because what we're looking at is only half of what Piri Reis knew. The map measures roughly 90 by 63 centimeters. It is drawn on gazelle skin parchment. The colors have faded. They were once vibrant reds and greens and blues, but the linework remains clear. It is oriented with south at the top, which was common for Islamic cartography of the period. On what we would call the upper right, the map shows the Atlantic coast of Europe and Africa, the Iberian Peninsula, the Canary Islands, the Azores. Nothing unusual here. These coastlines had been well documented by Portuguese and Spanish sailors for decades. Moving left, we see a series of islands: Hispaniola, Cuba, Jamaica, the Caribbean, drawn just 21 years after Columbus first landed there. The shapes are imperfect but recognizable. Again, not remarkable. Spanish charts of this region existed. Then South America. This is where the map becomes interesting. The eastern coastline is shown with unusual accuracy. The bulge of Brazil, the mouth of the Amazon, depicted as a massive delta system. The Rio de la Plata. The Falkland Islands, possibly. The coastline continues south. And here is where we enter disputed territory. Below the tip of South America, the map shows another coastline. A large one, curving eastward, with mountains, with bays, with what appear to be rivers. If this coastline is Antarctica, it was drawn 307 years before the first confirmed sighting of the continent. If it is the land beneath Antarctica's ice sheet, it was drawn thousands of years before any technology existed that could have revealed it. Piri Reis himself offers no help. In the marginal notes, he describes the coastlines he has drawn. He mentions Christopher Columbus by name. He says he used a chart captured from a Spanish sailor who had traveled with Columbus. He mentions Portuguese charts. He mentions ancient sources. But he does not say where the southern coastline came from. The silence is strange. Piri Reis was meticulous about citing his sources. He wanted people to know he was not inventing things. But for the most controversial part of his map, the part that would make it famous, he says nothing specific. Either he did not think it was unusual, or he did not want to explain where he got the information. There is one more detail. The coastline he drew does not match Antarctica as it appears today. It does not show the massive ice shelves that extend hundreds of miles beyond the land. It shows the coast as it would look if the ice were gone. As if someone, somehow, had seen Antarctica without its ice. Or had access to a source that had. Piri Reis left notes in the margins of his own map. 20 source charts, he wrote. Maybe more. He listed some of them. Charts from the age of Alexander the Great. 4 Portuguese maps, recently made. An Arabic map of India. And 1 map drawn by Christopher Columbus himself. The Columbus map, That one we can almost trace. Piri Reis wrote that his uncle Kamal captured a Spanish sailor in a naval battle in 1501. The sailor had a map. Columbus had drawn it. Kamal Reis was a corsair, raiding Christian ships in the western Mediterranean throughout the 1490s. Spanish vessels returning from the New World carried charts, logs, sketches of new coastlines. They would have made valuable prizes. But here is the problem. Columbus never sailed south of the Caribbean. He explored the islands. He touched the coast of Central America. He saw the northern edge of South America. He never came close to the southern tip of the continent, let alone whatever lies below it. A Columbus map cannot explain the southern coastline. The Portuguese maps might help a little more. Portuguese explorers had pushed further south along the coast of South America by 1513. Amerigo Vespucci, sailing for Portugal, had reached the Rio de la Plata by 1502. Some historians believe Portuguese ships may have sailed even further south, to Patagonia, by the time Piri Reis made his map. But this still leaves the Antarctic question unanswered. Portuguese ships had not reached Antarctica. No European ships had. The first confirmed sighting would not occur until 1820, when Russian, British, and American expeditions all spotted the continent within months of each other. This brings us to the most controversial possibility. Piri Reis mentions maps from the age of Alexander. He says he used ancient sources. What if the information about the southern coastline came from those sources? What if there were maps in circulation in the ancient world that showed lands we have only recently rediscovered? The idea sounds absurd at first. How could ancient peoples have known about Antarctica? But the question assumes that the ancient world was less capable than it actually was. Phoenician sailors circumnavigated Africa around 600 BCE. Greek navigators reached India. The extent of ancient maritime exploration is almost certainly larger than surviving records indicate. Most documents from the ancient world have been lost. We know, for certain, that knowledge was lost. The Library of Alexandria contained hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Most were destroyed. Medieval cartographers worked from fragments and copies of copies. Ptolemy geography, the foundational text of Western cartography, was itself a compilation of older sources. What Ptolemy knew, his sources knew before him. What they knew, their sources knew before them. The ancient Greeks had a name for the hypothetical southern continent, Terra Australis Incognita. The unknown southern land. They believed it had to exist to balance the landmasses of the northern hemisphere. This was theoretical. But was it only theoretical? Or were they preserving knowledge they no longer fully understood? There is another detail here that rarely gets mentioned. Piri Reis also shows islands in the Atlantic that do not correspond to any known landmass. One is labeled with a name that appears in medieval charts, Antilia. A legendary island that various cartographers placed in different locations over the centuries. Some historians believe Antilia represents garbled knowledge of the Americas, passed down through unknown channels before Columbus. If Piri Reis was drawing on source maps that contained real geographic knowledge disguised as legend, the Antarctic coastline might be another piece of the same puzzle. I find this explanation more plausible than the alternatives, though I cannot prove it. Piri Reis was not a fantasist. He was a working navigator who staked his professional reputation on accuracy. If he drew a coastline, he had a source for it. The question is not whether his sources existed. The question is how far back they reached, and what they contained. In 1960, a historian named Charles Hapgood published a book called Maps of the Ancient Seacanes. It made an extraordinary claim. Hapgood argued that the Piri Reis map did not merely show Antarctica, it showed Antarctica without its ice cap. And this meant that the original source maps dated to a time before the ice was there. Which meant they were at least 6,000 years old. Possibly much older. Hapgood was not a crank. He was a professor of history at Keene State College in New Hampshire. He had correspondence with Albert Einstein, who found his earlier work on Earth's crust displacement interesting enough to write the foreword. Hapgood approached the Piri Reis map with scholarly rigor. He made projections. He did calculations. He compared the map's coastline with modern surveys of Antarctica's subglacial geography. His conclusion was startling. The southern coastline on the Piri Reis map, when adjusted for the map's projection system, appeared to match the coastline of Queen Maud Land, the portion of Antarctica closest to South America, as revealed by seismic surveys conducted in 1949. The surveys had used echo-sounding technology to map the rock beneath the ice. The shape was similar. Hapgood took his analysis to the United States Air Force, specifically to the 8th Reconnaissance Technical Squadron at Westover Air Force Base, which specialized in cartographic analysis. He asked them to evaluate whether the Piri Reis coastline could represent Antarctica. The response, signed by Lieutenant Colonel Harold Z. Ohlmeyer, stated that the comparison was reasonable and that the geographic detail shown on the map was remarkably accurate for a pre-glacial coastline. This is where most popular accounts of the Piri Reis map stop. They quote the Air Force letter. They cite Hapgood's analysis. They conclude that the map shows Antarctica ice-free, therefore ancient advanced civilizations must have existed. The argument is simple and dramatic. It is also, in my view, incomplete. The problems start with the comparison itself. Hapgood had to significantly modify the Piri Reis map to make it align with Antarctica. He adjusted for projection. He rotated sections. He assumed certain distortions were errors that could be corrected. By the time he was finished, the match he found required a fair amount of interpretation. More critically, other researchers have proposed a simpler explanation. The southern coastline on the Piri Reis map might not be Antarctica at all. It might be South America, drawn incorrectly. Specifically, it might be the coast of Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego, bent eastward due to limitations in the projection or errors in the source maps Piri Reis was using. In the 16th century, calculating longitude was essentially impossible without a reliable marine chronometer, which would not be invented for another 250 years. Early maps routinely distorted east-west distances. If Piri Reis or his sources made errors in longitude, the southern coast of South America could have been displaced eastward, creating the appearance of a separate landmass below the continent. This is the mainstream academic position today. Most cartographic historians believe the Piri Reis map shows a distorted version of South America, not Antarctica. They point out that the map does not show the Drake Passage, the body of water between South America and Antarctica, which would be visible if the mapmaker truly knew both coastlines. But I'm not entirely satisfied with this explanation either. The mainstream view requires us to believe that Piri Reis, a meticulous navigator who explicitly prided himself on accuracy, made enormous errors in a region he devoted significant attention to. It requires us to believe that the coastal features shown, bays, mountains, river mouths, are all coincidental matches with Antarctic subglacial geography. Coincidences happen, but this many coincidences, in this specific configuration, seem like a lot to dismiss. And there is the ice itself. Antarctica has been covered by ice for millions of years. Not thousands, millions. The ice cap began forming approximately 34 million years ago. There were no humans then. There was no civilization. There was nothing that could have drawn a map. If the Piri Reis map really shows ice-free Antarctica, the source material is impossibly old. Hapgood tried to address this by proposing that the ice cap was much younger than geologists believed, or that portions of the coastline were ice-free more recently. Modern glaciology does not support this. The ice has been there, in essentially its current form, for far longer than any human presence on Earth. This is the central problem that the ancient source hypothesis cannot overcome. Not without invoking something beyond our current understanding of history. I think the most honest position is uncertainty. The Piri Reis map shows something in the south that we cannot fully explain. The mainstream explanation, that it's just South America, distorted, is possible but not proven. The ancient civilization explanation, that it shows ice-free Antarctica, is fascinating but scientifically untenable unless we're willing to revise our entire timeline of human history. Neither answer quite fits. And that's the problem. Before we close, I want to present some alternatives that don't require ancient advanced civilizations or impossible knowledge. Because the truth is, there are several possibilities that could explain portions of the Piri Reis mystery without breaking the laws of physics or rewriting human history. First, unknown pre-Columbian voyages. We know now that the Vikings reached North America around 1000 CE, 5 centuries before Columbus. We know that Polynesian navigators crossed vast stretches of the Pacific using only stars and currents. Is it impossible that other sailors, at other times, ventured further than our records show? Phoenician ships were remarkably seaworthy. Roman vessels were found in Brazil in the 19th century, dismissed at the time but now reconsidered by some scholars. The ocean has always been more permeable than we assumed. Second, secret Portuguese voyages. There is substantial evidence that Portugal concealed the extent of its explorations during the 15th and early 16th centuries. The Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, which divided the New World between Spain and Portugal, was suspiciously favorable to Portugal, as if the Portuguese knew more about South American geography than they were admitting. If Portuguese ships reached Patagonia or even the Antarctic Peninsula before 1513 and kept it secret, Piri Reis might have obtained those charts through the Ottoman intelligence networks. Third, the Ottoman factor. The Ottoman Empire in 1513 was one of the most sophisticated intelligence-gathering states in the world. Ottoman agents operated in every major European port. They collected maps, documents, reports, anything that might give the empire a strategic advantage. Piri Reis was well connected. He had access to information that might not have been available to European scholars of the same period. Fourth, Islamic geographic knowledge. The Islamic world preserved and expanded upon Greek and Roman geographic knowledge throughout the medieval period. Scholars in Baghdad, Cairo, and Córdoba had access to texts that were lost in Europe. Al-Idrisi's 12th century world map, commissioned by the Norman king of Sicily, showed remarkable accuracy in regions Europeans would not explore for centuries. The tradition Piri Reis inherited was deeper and older than the European tradition Columbus relied upon. Fifth, composite confusion. Piri Reis was explicitly combining multiple sources into a single map. When you merge charts drawn at different scales, using different projections, from different time periods, strange things can happen. Coastlines can appear where they shouldn't. Landmasses can be duplicated. What looks like an unknown continent might be a familiar one, displaced and distorted by the mechanics of compilation. Each of these explanations has strengths and weaknesses. The composite confusion theory explains why the map is strange, but not why the strange parts seem to match real geography. The secret voyage theory is unprovable, which cuts both ways. The Islamic knowledge theory is historically grounded but doesn't explain Antarctic-specific details. I lean toward a combination. Piri Reis had better sources than we give him credit for. Some of those sources contained genuine information about southern regions, possibly obtained through voyages that were never officially recorded. When he compiled his map, he included everything, even when he wasn't sure exactly what it was. He was comprehensive. That was his nature. The frustrating thing is that we might already have the answer if we had the other half of the map. The eastern section, which would have shown Asia and the Indian Ocean, might contain notes, sources, or details that would illuminate everything. But that half is gone, lost to time, or hidden somewhere, waiting to be rediscovered. We cannot know where the eastern half of the map went, or when it was separated, or by whom. This is the first void. We cannot know the full contents of the source maps Piri Reis used. He mentions them, but he does not reproduce them. They no longer exist, or if they exist, they have not been found. This is the second void. We cannot know whether the southern coastline is Antarctica, distorted South America, or something else entirely. The evidence supports multiple interpretations. None is definitive. This is the third void. We cannot know what was lost when the great libraries burned, when the ships sank, when the empires fell. Knowledge does not always survive. Sometimes it disappears completely. Sometimes it surfaces centuries later in unexpected places. A fragment of gazelle skin in a Turkish palace. Half a map that raises more questions than it answers. The Piri Reis map hangs in the Topkapi Palace Museum today. Tourists walk past it. Most do not stop. It looks like what it is: an old map, faded and torn, from an age when the world was still being discovered. Or rediscovered. Or remembered from somewhere much older. Beneath Antarctica, the rock continues to exist. Mountains, valleys, riverbeds carved by water that flowed millions of years ago. The ice reveals nothing. Perhaps the map reveals something. Perhaps it reveals nothing at all. We stand at the edge of the evidence. The rest is darkness. The Piri Reis map has been studied for nearly a century. Historians have examined every inch of the parchment. Cartographers have run every projection. Scientists have compared it to satellite data and seismic surveys and ice-penetrating radar. We are no closer to a definitive answer than Halil Edhem Eldam was in 1929, standing alone in a dusty library, holding something he could not explain. The sources are lost. The mapmaker is dead. The eastern half is missing. We have half a map from a man who prided himself on accuracy, showing a coastline that may or may not depict a continent that would not be officially discovered for 3 more centuries. And no one can tell us, with certainty, where the information came from. This case remains open.